You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Betoota Advocate on Desert Rock FM. Welcome to the Betoota Advocate radio show. You're joined by myself, Clancy Overall, editor of the Betoota Advocate, and we've got Errol Parker here, editor at large. Now, today's guest is one I've been wanting to talk to ever since, I guess, the world shifted off kilter a couple of years ago, and we all started talking about words like resilience and, New York strong. That was a big one. Or pulling together. Today's guest, I guess, is an expert on all those things well before we were required to by public health orders. He's a speaker, he's a storyteller, he's a vagabond. Tom Nash, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here.
Now, you've spoken to way bigger audiences than just the two of us here.
Well, I mean, it's not really a case of quantity, is it, or quality?
Oh, well, I don't know. You've got two punters.
Yeah. I've spoken to more people than you, but I don't know you well enough to say if I've spoke to better people than you.
Yeah, okay, beauty. Well, we'll try and impress.
But I guess we'll find out over the next half an hour or so.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to what were you doing as a young man? What were you studying as a young man before everything changed for you? Were you a narrator in any way, or what were you thinking of doing with yourself as a 19-year-old Sydney uni student before you had to start learning about things like resilience and pulling together?
I had about as much idea what I wanted to do with my life as I guess any 19-year-old does. I was pretty much obsessed with music, so I was a guitarist.
Yep.
And I just loved playing music. I wasn't in a band or anything like that. I think I had a lot of self-apprehension, I guess, about taking music further than my bedroom. And I had a couple of little gigs that I played here and there when I was playing guitar, just like little, you'd go to a 50th birthday of a friend's father or a small restaurant where you'd be playing like Eagles songs to 60-year-olds or something like that. But it never confidence in the sense that I felt like I could take my own music and write a band and things like that. At the time, I was also studying a Bachelor of Science in Psychology at Sydney University. But I'd chosen that degree because I had an interest in the human condition, but I didn't really need to feel like I was going to apply it vocationally in any sense.
Yeah.
Down the road. I think for many people it's just kind of expected that that's what you do after high school. You go to university, and so if you don't have any idea of where you're going, you just pick something that you're interested in and hope that it doesn't bore you to death.
That actually sounds like you're professionalizing being a musician. A great songwriter's interested in the human condition, but if you've got a family that kind of expects tertiary education, you can't just go and smoke billies and write songs.
No, absolutely, yeah. And I worked in a pub as well at the time because, I mean, this was back, so I'm talking year 2000, 2001, where you could convincingly move out of home at the age of 18 and be able to afford to rent on your own while being at uni and just have a job on the weekend. Yeah. And, not to say like it was tight, but it's not like these days where you kind of, you'll be living at home till 40. So,
Or you'll be living with six mates and you'll hear your 42-year-old neighbours having sex.
Yeah, that's right.
And you could still enjoy a Marlboro about 1.5 meters away from the bar.
Yeah, that's right. Or I think you could smoke in bars.
Yeah, you just had to be that far away, So
did you? Yeah, I can't believe you remember that legislation. That's interesting. I smoked Rolly cigarettes, so I was like, I could afford that everywhere. There's no way I could have lived the way I lived nowadays.
No, you'd almost need to be on like 140 and working at Microsoft, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's right. While studying your degree. Yeah. So yeah, my basic outline of my life at that point was I would go to uni during the week, I'd work in the pub on the weekends, and my passion would be playing the guitar. And so about halfway through that, about 2001, I had a day where I ended up feeling really sick, like I had a flu or something like that.
Yeah.
I was at uni at the time, and I went straight home and I put myself to bed. And then by the time I woke up the next day, through a horrible evening of sort of waking up, being half asleep and half awake and dragging myself to the bathroom to vomit and running hot water on myself and passing out in the shower, I woke up and I texted my stepsister and I said, I think you need to take me to the doctor. And by the time she got to my place, maybe 20 minutes later, she took a look at me and I had a purple rash all over my face and everywhere that she could see on my body. And it turned out I'd contracted meningococcal disease. And it's one of these touch and go diseases where if you'd presented to hospital 10 minutes earlier, you might have been significantly better off such that you have less things amputated. But if you're 10 minutes later, you'd be dead.
Yeah.
Which creates a really interesting relationship between you and the concept of luck.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
for sure.
because you're kind of like, are
Yeah.
you unlucky for this to have happened, or are you lucky to be alive? It's kind of a moot point in a way.
Yeah, it is. It's far more touch and go than, say, something happening to someone on a remote property. You break a leg on a remote property, there's no one around. We kind of look at the factors around that. But yeah, meningococcal
Yeah,
has
that's
always
an
been
interesting
that.
point. Yeah, I met somebody in hospital once who was a rural worker who'd lost her arm in a tractor accident. And I think she said the same thing. She said it was hours before she was attended to.
Yeah.
So how does one contract the meningococcal virus? Is there certain sort of risk factors? Like, are there things in the environment that you shouldn't touch?
Not really. It's contracted in a very similar way to COVID, I think, via saliva.
Yeah.
Just a lot more rare.
Yeah.
And to my understanding, a lot of people actually carry it naturally but unaffected by it. And sometimes those two people, the person that's susceptible, I guess you would say, it comes into contact with somebody who has it but is unaffected by it, and their immune system is at a particularly low level that they aren't able to fight it themselves, then they can be at risk. There is a vaccine for it now. Came out a couple of years after I got it.
Go on again. Touch and go.
Hey, I was doing it before it was cool.
Yeah,
all
for sure.
Just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But I think vaccinated people don't need to worry about it too much these days, although please don't take medical advice from me.
Yeah.
I feel like one of those guys that offers financial advice on YouTube. Yeah. This is not personal advice.
Yeah. Oh, please gamble responsibly.
But the upshot of that was that I spent the next 18 months in hospital, and they had to amputate both my legs just below the knee to stop the sepsis from spreading and killing me. And then a couple of weeks after that, they had to amputate my arms as well at the elbow, which, apart from being the obvious loss of independence and pain and tragedy and all that sort of stuff, it also signified a great loss of independence in terms of being able to play the guitar, which was my one creative outlet. Mm-hmm. And so I spent the next 18 months in hospital.
In a rehab situation, in a rehab environment? Or
Yeah, the first 6 months was not in rehab. That was... having things chopped off me and dealing with a lot of skin damage that I had. So I spent most of my time in the burns unit in Concord because they treat your skin like burns.
Yeah, right.
And then a year after that in a rehabilitation hospital. And that's where I, started the very slow process of learning to walk using prosthetics and getting some sort of an arm prosthetic, whatever that ended up looking like, to be able to complete basic tasks like drinking, eating, and picking things up.
Like drinking and smoking and
In fact, those were the first two things that I learned. I'm not kidding. For a bit, I wasn't able to walk, and so I was in an electric wheelchair, so I had a makeshift arm that was able to push the wheelchair. Indeed, that was the first thing that I learned how to do with a prosthetic arm attachment, because there was a sense of independence and liberty about that, I guess, being the master of your own destination, as it were. And then the second thing was learning how to smoke again.
Yeah. So did you have to move on to the town smokes?
Yeah,
or
I did.
did you learn how to roll
No, I was straight on to TaylorMade. I wasn't going to...
on your town smokes? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I want to ask about that independence thing, because you were living out of home just before it happened, but 19 is an age where you're like, what does independence feel like? You're in the middle of a transition anyway. You're not far from living in the nest. Do you reckon that probably helped you with your transition into this, the age you were? Do you think that helped you be prepared to tackle this new life because you were already young and kind of looking at what was out there in the world? You're already in that mindset. I don't know much about this world, so I definitely don't know much about this world missing 4 limbs, as opposed to having
it's an
40.
interesting age to contract something like this, because I remember learning that there were 3 key age groups for meningococcal, and one was infants.
Yep.
The other was teenagers or adolescents, specifically around my age, mainly due to lifestyle reasons. Like you would be more likely to, let's say, share a drink or share a cigarette with somebody. Yeah. And then the third age group was people around the age of 50, or sort of middle-aged, 50 of 60.
Yeah.
Of whom I actually met somebody at that age that got a similar disease. And I think they're interesting ways of looking at them from different age groups, because I think when you're older, you're so set in your ways that you feel like you've lost more.
Yeah.
And so it could arguably be more difficult. And when you're an infant, I think, obviously it's tragic, but often infants that grow up having lost limbs adapt to them a lot better.
Yeah. And that's all they ever know.
Yeah. Yeah. Or they would hardly remember, having an actual limb. And for me, I'm somewhere in between that, where I'd lived 19 years being able-bodied, and then all of a sudden had to switch to disability and just see how I like the size of that. So I'm not sure whether specifically the independence of living alone really did much. I think it was quite typical for people of my age around that time.
Yeah.
But certainly being that age would make you physically more robust, I guess, than immunocompromised people at an older age who would find it more difficult to fight a disease like that.
So what was the response from your mates? Like, I know it sounds like your mates were taking you in your motorised scooter to the pub to drink schooners, but, where were they at in life? And were they, is that almost the ideal age? You know what I mean? Socially. I remember being 19, I had some mates that, you could remove 4 limbs and you wouldn't even know. Like they were sitting at home and they were around and they were hanging. So was that seamless or was that tricky? Back to the social aspect of just being around people.
I was extremely lucky to have a really good group of friends, and you don't need a whole lot. You know what I mean? You only need a few key people that are really dedicated. And I had a handful that came in to see me every day, and we're all in the same point in our life. We're all in first year uni and spent a lot of time with each other. Some of them I went to high school with, and a couple of others I didn't. So I was lucky to have that support network, because, support networks are different if they're friends and family. That's one thing to point out, because I think you have different conversations with family than you do with friends.
Yeah.
But just overall having friends and family around, it's not just the support that you think on paper would be good, but it's also a strange kind of accountability thing as well, such that if you've got a lot of people around you rooting for you effectively, you feel very much the pressure not to let them down. And I think that's a big motivator for people who do have strong support groups around them to actually be able to weather the storm.
I can see where you're at that time where you're relearning everything. A lot of milestones you got to go through again, prosthetics, you got to do your first steps again. How long after that did you start thinking about operating beyond adversity? How long did you think it's no longer about this in what I do day to day?
Well, that's an interesting question. I guess, adversity in a way is a constant. Mm-hmm. Of course, I had the big challenges of walking and becoming independent and doing things like that. But adversity is there for everyone, and it's there always. There are always challenges presenting themselves. So I don't think it's a case of there being a, out of the woodsy flagfall type part of your life. Mm-hmm. But using the techniques to be able to take on challenges in a better way, in a different way to what you might have if not having gone through that stuff, is really the key mental change that I had to make. And a lot of it is to do with just realizing that I had to do everything differently to what I did before. I had to solve problems differently. A lot of it was vulnerability, the idea that, having been in hospital and constantly been an exposition in a way to many people, you deal with vulnerability differently, and I find myself less vulnerable now, and I don't have as much, I guess, apprehensions socially. I find myself more confident. I'm more confident with who I am. And then there's even small things like your ability to make iterative processes far more pragmatic, in that you just take small steps towards things and focus on those rather than big goals, which is something that I might have learned, let's say, when walking. Yeah. It's an interesting thing, right? When learning to walk again with prosthetics, you have to actually watch the road in front of you, because you have to feel the ground with your eyes to know what the terrain is like.
Of course.
And when I was being set all of these walking goals by physiotherapists, and they'd be like, just keep your eye on the main goal. And I'm like, instinctually, I don't want to do that, right? What I want to do is I want to watch the road in front of me. And while I'm doing that, a second order effect is that I have these small goals that I work towards. So I can only see 5 meters in front. And that makes the larger and more macro journey kind of sort itself out.
Yeah.
And you end up focusing on things that are around you and in your immediate vicinity better than you would if you had this ironically myopic macro view of your end goal, in which sometimes you don't take time to kind of smell the roses.
That's what I want to ask you about, smelling the roses, right? So you said you lost your creative passion, your creative outlet in guitar.
For a while.
When you got that back, did you feel that? Did that feel you like a hit? Could you smell the roses in that moment when you started making music again?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The story about that was I decided that I was going to try to play the guitar with my 2 prosthetic hooks, which might be regarded as by any sane person as ambitious.
There weren't any YouTube tutorials.
Well, you could probably start with the lap steel.
Well, yeah, I ended up there. I didn't want to start there, and I didn't really end up there. What I did was I went through all these different designs that I could use. Some of them were like a stamp that would go over a guitar neck that would enact different chord progressions and things by pressing buttons. It was a really interesting process of trying to design something that would enable me to play the guitar. And then through each process, I was breaking down in the same way that I would overcome any kind of problem-solving challenge. And I ended up with almost like a slide that I could hold. And then I got an engineer to create one and a pick holder for my hook that fit, and converted my old Stratocaster to a lap steel kind of by just raising the action a little bit, putting some flat wound strings and open tuning it. And yes, I was able to play the guitar, but I was able to play it almost immediately because I already had the music knowledge.
Yeah.
So it was just getting around the physicality.
Right.
And obviously there was that rush of getting that back.
Yeah, for sure.
And being able to write again and have that creative outlook. But what I realized as well was that, having overcome so much shit up until that point, all of my previous, apprehensions about creating a band and playing live in front of people, my own songs, seemed to pale in comparison to the challenges that I'd overcome up until that point.
Yeah.
And therefore I was able to take it further. I started a band and we even got studio time and recorded a CD. We started playing gigs in public, original music. We toured in Melbourne. I don't think I would have done any of that had I just been playing guitar as an able-bodied person. I probably would have held on to that apprehension for a couple of years.
It would have just been a creative outlet at home.
I'd just like to go back and ask you about the transition from rehab to come back into the Matrix. What was that transition like? I mean, you always knew that day was going to come and you'd have to come back into the world. How did you find that?
It was interesting because how time feels different at different points in your life. And to me, it felt like such a long process. But in reality, when I got out of hospital, I first went to live with my mother in the Blue Mountains for about 8 months. And then I moved out onto my own into a house to live independently. That felt like such a long time, but it was really less than a year from being in hospital to living on my own again. And it carried with it so many unanticipated advantages. Like, for instance, I remember when I moved out of hospital into my mother's place, she lived in this small 2-bedroom kit home in Mount Victoria. And if you can imagine every aspect of a house that would make it easy for a disabled person to rehabilitate, and then you inverted all of those attributes, you would come close to imagining my mother's house. And so it had a really steep pebbled driveway that was hard to traverse, and it had an old wooden staircase with large stairs, and it was a tiny pokey house. But I realized that it was actually the best place that I could go to rehabilitate, because if I could do if I could live in that place, I could live anywhere.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then when I moved out on my own to my own place, another thing that I discovered was they typically send to you an occupational therapist when you have a disability, and they'll go around your house and they'll be like, okay, well, we can just change everything around to be, something that, a disabled person would be easy for them to use. And instinctively, I kind of knew that I wanted as little of this shit as possible, because, I wanted to be able to find the limitations of my own abilities before I started adapting my environment to me.
Yeah.
And the example I often use is a kettle, and, so they can get you a kettle that you don't have to pick up. You just press a button and it tips. But then what happens if I'm at someone else's house or if I go traveling? You know, I want to be able to use any kettle.
Yeah, it's like anyone. It's like the boyfriend who's never driven a manual ute until he has to move house with his girlfriend.
Precisely. Having that skill, like knowing your limitation of that skill, because you know your skills are actually transferable, but your environment is transient.
Yeah. To even think that, you know, Mount Victoria, looking back, you probably didn't like it at the time, and I can't imagine how challenging those 8 months were. But looking back, you wanted it harder. You wanted it to be more difficult.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said that to you if we were talking at the time, but I'm better off for it.
Yeah. So then tell us where you kind of start thinking, all right, well, I've developed a way of looking at the world. I've developed a way of adapting. When did you start thinking, oh, I'm in a position to share this?
Not for quite a while, actually.
Yeah.
I never wanted to be one of those people that starts sharing an experience or a viewpoint that I've developed that is woefully underdeveloped.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted to wait until I'd been doing stuff for about 10 years to have something useful to talk about, because I don't think it's useful just to say, hey, I've lost 4 arms and legs and here I am.
Yeah.
Because that's not very pragmatic. But I wanted to be able to have achieved some things first. And I wanted to take some time to reflect on, you know, exactly what that is as a mechanism and also how it can be useful to other people. So not just that it's something that I've overcome, but everyone can sort of feel good about listening to the story and then switch off and forget about it in a week. I think that's kind of useless.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until probably my, I'd say, mid-30s that I started doing talks and speaking to people. And then even that in a process was quite collaborative in the sense that I often find it was a lot like DJing. For your listeners who don't know, presumably I ended up becoming a DJ, but we'll get to that. The DJing process is very much like a conversation where it's not a didactic position, right? So it ought not to be something that you sit behind the decks and prescribe exactly what everyone should be listening to.
Yeah.
It's kind of a conversation between you and the audience and
their vibe, yeah.
You know, you feed off them, you know what they want, you give them what they want and a little bit of something they don't know. And speaking is kind of the same in the way that over the years of doing it, you start to learn what resonates with people and what doesn't. And so it's not a case of just being like, okay, it's fine to you know, tell my story now. It's a case of, you know, let's see what helps people. Let's see what resonates with people. And I'll just keep telling stories and trying to be as introspective as I can about my own situation and see what other people can actually draw from it.
That's really, I never thought of that. Public speaking is actually not too different to DJing. You know, sometimes you surprise them, but for the most part, you're kind of keeping it a bit safe and comfortable in many aspects too. Tell us about DJing. So you're sick of touring in a band. You decided to mix it up. Go disc jockey, digital CDJ. What are we working with?
Well, actually, you know, the DJing thing was unanticipated, like many things in my life, I guess. And so we were in the band in around, I think it was 2004, 2005. And as I said, we'd been playing in a few venues around Sydney and Melbourne. And I was studying at the time sound engineering, and then I went on to do music business management. And one of the requirements for the course was that I do a few weeks of work experience could be wherever, you know, it could be a music agency or it could be a radio show or what. And I had some loose contacts in the nightclub world because I'd booked these shows. And so I got some work experience in a club in King's Cross. At the time, Chris, who had been my best friend from high school and been through my journey the whole way through hospital and also was in my band, he'd started DJing at a friend's party on a Saturday night, just kind of rock music, one after the other type DJing. And I got him down to this club to do some late night DJing, and I reworked how they ran one of their Thursday nights, started booking bands and things like that, and made it really popular. And so realized that I had kind of a knack for that. And Chris and I were talking about how we'd like to do something on our own because there was no remuneration in situ in that particular instance. And
There was nothing. There was nothing going on. Like no bar tabs, no nothing.
Oh no, no. Sorry, you'd often get a few free drinks, but no sort of cash return type thing.
No, because it was still like it was just before we had the tidal wave of Australian EDM. Like in 2004, like the top of the charts was like, "What About Me?" You know, Black Betty. You know, and.
Are you reading that off a thing, or? Are you...
Oh no! Like I'm just having to cast my mind back.
This is really tragic that I'm pulling this out of my brain. Rove hosted the Arias that year, and got on stage with Spiderbait as they performed Black Betty.
Actually, I think the biggest the biggest song that year was Maroon 5's "She Will Be Loved."
Oh, that's a track. Look. Probably not what you were curating there.
No, and then just a few more years, and then we come into like the Midnight Juggernauts. They start coming around. You know, you've got coming into Muscles. You know,
I think a lot of things changed.
It's interesting you talk about timing because I think we were really lucky in timing in that we ended up starting a club ourselves at the beginning of 2006.
Yeah,
right.
And I think 6 and 7 were the golden eras, particularly for like old school electro kind of stuff. Yeah. And we got lucky with timing.
Where was your club?
It was at Club 77 in Sydney.
Yep.
Whoa.
Actually, it's still going, this club.
Oh,
now.
it is. Yep.
Yeah, not in a weekly capacity. In about 2018, we moved to doing special events. So we now do like Halloween and Mardi Gras and things like that. And we DJ at other places, Ministry of Sound events and stuff. Yeah. But when we started in 2006, we weren't DJs. I certainly wasn't a DJ. Yeah. Actually, my first gig was on our first night, because we didn't frame it around the technical abilities of the DJs.
No.
Yeah,
because we didn't have any, and so we just framed it around the branding, the personalities of the people that were at the club, the decorations, all of the people that worked there, the drink specials, the posters. And people kind of resonated with that. It was a kind of carefree attitude. They didn't come expecting us to be really good.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then what happened was we developed over the years and we ended up, getting quite decent at DJing, which was unanticipated. And then it just ended up being a career. And that's what I've done most of my life.
You can do that. You can pull off a vibe. Like if anyone's really looked closely at the Sex Pistols play music, they're not that good. Like,
no, they're horrible. Yeah.
I know, but like you can really, but like it's so strange. Like in Australian pub rock, you can really see where the high watermark was and where the water started to recede, and that was at Wave Aid. So I think that Australian pub rock peaked when Bernard Fanning did Evie Part 2.
Evie Part 2, yeah.
That was the absolute high watermark, and then from there it receded down and Australian EDM came up.
That's interesting. I've never really looked into that, but yeah, I will now. That's fascinating.
That was a big day, actually. They had Jet singing Evie Part 1.
Yeah, and they absolutely destroyed the SCG for it. Like, they were just like, they had so many games there, and they had one more game. Like, I think that New South Wales had to play the Blues there 2 weeks later, and they walked on that pitch and they were like, what in God's name has gone on here? Like, they didn't even try to cover it. Like, there's just like all these caps off bottles, fucking darts, and like they're just like.
I thought you were going to say it was something like that. Did you see that documentary about what was it, Woodstock 99?
Oh yeah, Woodstock.
Yeah.
They just burnt the city to the ground.
Yeah,
just I can't believe that Ben Lee was there. It was like, hey, Limp Bizkit, catch my disease.
No, he was Ben Lee was in the newcomers tent.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say he was like the sacrificial goat that they threw to all the Rage Against the Machine fans.
Kid Rock. It's a great era. So, I mean, obviously you were doing something for the kids outside of that, that kind of nu metal or whatever else was going on in commercial radio anyway, and that kind of started pumping. More so, the transition I want to ask now, aside from, you move to the Blue Mountains one day and you're missing 4 limbs and you've got to make that transition into, independence. I want to know this because I find this one even more rare to see. How do you transition from being a nightclub promoter into normal society?
You don't. You're forever cast away with I don't know, the vagabonds of society, I guess. But yeah, we also never really thought about ourselves as nightclub promoters because we just ran an event. We ran a party. And yeah, sure, we promoted it to an extent, but we were also the face of it and we were the DJs. And that wasn't really done much.
Yeah.
Right? So back then, save for a few different brands, the format was usually that you'd have the event organizer who booked everything, you'd have the club promoter, they would have promoters underneath them, then you would have the DJs that would come in, and it was a bit of a patchwork quilt, whereas we wore all of those hats simultaneously.
Right.
And so it was almost like coming to our house for a house party, except it was in a club.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, it worked. People liked it.
Yeah.
So what are you doing day to day now? We're going to come see you.
Are you guys coming to South by Southwest?
Yeah, we're going to come see you at South by Southwest Sydney.
Yeah.
Do you kind of move towards, as you said, speaking to audiences and sharing what sharing your pragmatism, well, what's the word you use? Separation of life noise.
I don't specifically use that. That's in my bio, and I never write my own bios because I can't.
Yeah, right. Which is surprising.
Someone
'cause you're
else's
such a great
opinion on
speaker.
what I do.
Yeah.
Well, it's good now that we've got AI to do it.
Yeah. I should just write all my future keynotes on ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Is this what you do day to day?
Yeah, so these days I'm doing a lot more speaking than I am DJing, and that's mainly because I'm now 40.
Yep.
And it's not a physical challenge. I still do DJ from a few times a year or something. I just lack the ability to have those kinds of conversations in nightclubs anymore. So I can't, bring myself to do that. But I can in events like South by Southwest and obviously in the keynote environment. And I'm also writing a book which is going to be out in September this year called Hook, Line, and Sinner.
Oh,
And
God. We've got 3-4 puns here, man.
That's right. So I've got that coming out in September, and then the month later we got South by Southwest, which I think I've been looking forward to more than any event I've got coming on the horizon. That's going to be a fantastic week. So I'll get to see you guys there in person.
No, we'll have to say g'day. Well, we look forward to seeing you down there. Tom, thank you for joining us today, and what a great yarn. I can't wait to hear you actually on stage waxing as opposed to trying to navigate the dry Western Queensland, I guess you'd say, interviewing tactics that we've applied to you today.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm excited about this talk because, and I've given this talk in a few small areas before, but it's about universal design. So it's kind of a little bit different to what we've been talking about of the, anti-fragility, or I guess is a word that I would use for it. People often use resilience, but I don't think that's correct. But this is about universal design because, as you know, South by Southwest is very sort of tech forward and tech focused and future thinking.
Yeah.
And so this topic is how universal design can benefit the broader population. Yeah. And what universal design is, it's designing when optimizing for a person's specific needs.
Yeah.
So a very easy example is, you have cutouts in curbs.
Yeah.
And they were designed for people in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
Now, that has gone on to benefit parents with prams and strollers and kids with skateboards and things like that. For sure. Door handles rather than circular doorknobs are used for people with reduced motor capacity or whatever it is, or kids escaping from burning buildings, but also useful to any able-bodied person to open it with their elbow if they're holding a tray of lattes to the office, right?
Yeah.
And so I have this deep interest in how innovating for universal design actually helps the wider population.
Yeah, that's it. And it's not literally just accessibility. I know those down in the Waverley Council in Bondi, the stop-go buttons were automated for the Jewish community on the Sabbath, so they couldn't engage with technology. And then all of a sudden, that was the system that got rolled out across the country for COVID-19 social distancing. We had the automated stop-go button. Yeah,
I'm going to get you to send me a link on that because I'd love to read more about it.
Yeah, but that is interesting. What you're talking about universally, it kind of actually eliminates the idea of accessibility or tailored accessibility.
It just becomes good design.
It just becomes good design. That's it. I mean, and it's not just limited to the physical world, right? Because if you think about a lot of the technology that we use these days, things like speech to text, or text to speech
Yeah.
were initially developed for people that needed it.
Yeah.
But then everyone uses it. I can't tell you how many people I see, if I go to a bar and it's crowded and noisy, that are watching YouTube videos with closed captions on.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And also, most of my friends will use accessibility features on their iPhone.
Yeah.
Which I always say is kind of like the technological equivalent of parking in the disabled spot.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a really fun. It's going to be a really fun presentation. I hope you guys can make it for that.
The more I think about it, the more everything works, right? Like, I mean, audiobooks weren't, weren't initially made for people who didn't like reading.
Yeah, there are so many innovations that are downstream of this kind of design that I think it's a really good way for individuals and companies to think about how they can innovate using this as a mechanism.
Yeah, terrific. Mate, we look forward to it. We'll see you down there.
Yeah, I'll see you there. Take care.